Hello and welcome to 5 to Watch here on the Football 365 show, brought to you by Football Index, where you bet on the football stock market by buying shares in the world's top players. 18 plus, begambleaware.org. I'm Mark Smith. I'm joined as ever with Pete Farries and also Football Index expert Rob Hemmingway. We're going to be looking at the games from the weekend, really, mainly FA Cup, picking out 5 players that we think are worth keeping an eye out. But there has been some massive breaking news, so we will go into that pretty quickly. Yeah, a lot to talk about. This is 5 to Watch, brought to you by Football Index. Right, Pete, literally 10 seconds before we started recording this, we had the news that it looks like Frank Lampard has lost his job at Chelsea. What are your initial reactions to that?
Well, yeah, it's odd, isn't it? I mean, it's not odd, actually, because this is what happens. But the last 3 Chelsea managers to leave their roles do so off the back of a win. That was a tweet I saw from Team Talk editor James Marshman earlier. It's really interesting that Chelsea seem to have something in mind and the result doesn't matter of your final game. I think Lampard could have done with maybe doing what Gerrard has done, or perhaps even just going off and staying at Derby for a little bit longer, maybe taking a mid-level Premier League team instead and just learning a little bit more. I don't think he's done terribly. I think he's been unlucky. They signed some great players, Werner, Havertz and the like, but they maybe just got themselves into a position where they were just top-heavy and the rest of the team just didn't quite work. He's got his favourites there, he's got the players who aren't quite working there, and he's just not being able to find the balance. I still think he could turn out to be a very, very good manager in the future, I have to say. Yeah,
he's still really young, isn't he? But it's quite telling that neither one of us are really surprised by this. The game against Luton at the weekend, yeah, like you say, they won and he was sacked on the back of it. But there's a player, Rob Hemmingway, that seems to get inextricably linked with Lampard. He's definitely a Lampard favourite, Mason Mount. I love him as a player. I think he's wonderful. There is quite a lot of people out there who maybe not so keen, and I wonder if that is used sometimes as a stick to beat Lampard with. He's very much a Frank Lampard player. He plays like him. He's obviously one of his favourites. Talk me through his price on Football Index.
Yeah, well, interestingly, he's actually gone up in price quite a bit just lately. So he was kind of around sort of 130. He's gone up more towards the £2 mark. As a result, I think, of some really good performances despite his team not doing so well. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens to him now. He obviously was a Lampard favourite, as you say. Will the new manager treat him in the same way? Will he be as effective? Will he play in the same position? He's a really interesting stat I saw recently was that he's created the most goals from dead balls this season of anyone, more than Bruno, more than James Rodriguez, more than anyone else.
Right,
so
yeah.
He's sort of, clearly a bit of a linchpin, but does he retain that place if and when a new manager comes in?
I think, you know what? I think he has to return. I think any manager going in there, whether it's Tuchel or whether it's Allegri or whoever it is, I think within a couple of weeks he's starting for them as well. I think he's a great player.
I think so. I think he's a sort of player that can adjust to different managers and play different systems. So I don't think it'll be a problem. It just, you just never know, do you?
You never know. Right, let's move on to the actual biggest game of the weekend just gone. We had United-Liverpool last weekend, and only nerds like me and Pete enjoyed it. No one else seemed to like it. This time round, though, Pete, it was a proper game, wasn't it? Proper FA Cup game, a throwback, if you like.
It was a throwback. It was actually a better game than I thought it would be. And actually, I was a bit not confused, but it just seemed like a very different game to the league game. And that, when you think of what's at stake, makes perfect sense. There's a couple of great performances in there. Clearly, Liverpool, the likes of Williams aren't quite there yet. And we saw Williams get run ragged by one man throughout the entire match. Manchester United look good. There we go.
Yeah.
And actually, they look reliably good, because there has been times
headline.
since Sir Alex left, there has been times where they've looked good, but then 3 games later, they've looked all over the place. They've had an amazing result. They come back against PSG, and then they lose, the next couple, or they struggle badly.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is really interesting about this. They look consistently, reliably, and solidly good. And right now, Liverpool do not.
Who stood out for you, Pete? Any players for United?
Yeah, well, Cavani, I think, is looking very, very good. We obviously have the pace and the guile of someone like Rashford. Luke Shaw has become the player that many people thought he could become a few years ago before that terrible injury. Manchester United just look great. And Pogba, of course, we've seen over the last few weeks improve massively as well. So things are going in Ole's favour at the moment.
Rob, bring you in on this one. Cavani, Pete mentioned there. He looks like a proper number 9, doesn't he? I mean, we liked Martial last season. We still think he's a good player, but maybe he's not that absolute, guaranteed goal scorer in the number 9 position that United crave.
Well, yeah, Cavani. I mean, I'll hit you up front with some really interesting Football Index stats. So the last 12 months, he's had a 65% dividend yield, which is enormous. And
Right.
that's across match day and media. And then in the last 3 months, he's had 8 top 5 media finishes. That's to say that he's one of those guys that's just always in the news and therefore is always likely to kind of get the payouts on Football Index at the end of it. So, you know, what's also interesting for me from a Football Index perspective is that he's 33, and typically you'd see a bit of a drop off in share price at that sort of age, which we have seen. He's only kind of 80p or so, but he's still an absolute behemoth when it comes to dividends. And I think when you look at Ibrahimovic, who's 39 and still doing it, that's an interesting trend that you could see across the platform with others like Cristiano Ronaldo, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. He's someone who just keeps on getting better with age. He's someone that so many players can learn off as well. I think he's been a really astute signing for United. Let's move on. Let's talk about the Everton match at the weekend. Everton beat Sheff Wednesday 3-0. I do like this Everton side, and they seem to have some consistency now, Pete. Did you see that game? What did you make of it?
I didn't see it, but from what I've read, it sounds like Everton were yet again very, very solid. And I think you've mentioned there they seem to have found form again. And that is no surprise to me that some of their best players have been coming back from injury. James was out for a little while. We know that. He comes back. Everton starts to improve. Digne, although it didn't start brilliantly for him in the FA Cup last time, things start to improve and get more solid. And with Carlo Ancelotti as your manager, one of the best managers of his generation, and yet somehow, because he's quietish, publicly doesn't get spoken of that, in that way very often, it's true. So they've got this whole thing built. They've got a side that's ticking over beautifully. They've got a side that has got Andre Gomes in that can't really get a 90 minutes. What really interests me about Andre Gomes is that he's had one 90-minute game this season. And that was the 5-2 win over West Brom. Barring that, he hasn't played 90 minutes. And while his stats aren't amazing, and Rob will take you through this in more detail in a second, he's a player who defies stats. Because actually everything else he does is what you need someone in your team to do. But Rob will take you through a Football Index side of that, because Gomez, I think, is brilliant. But does he work as a buy on Football Index? Yeah,
go on, Rob, because Gomez, when they signed Doucouré and Alan, I thought he might not be playing very much for Everton. But he's had a few more opportunities now with Alan being injured, and he's stepped up, hasn't he? So how does that reflect itself in Football Index?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how he's come back from the injury. I think he had kind of a bit of a spike where he was playing quite a bit at the start of the season, and maybe there was that sort of adrenaline and surge in form of just getting back on the pitch. And I think he's kind of had a bit of a double dip, if you like, and that's certainly been reflected on Football Index. Because his price back in September was about, I think, 70, 75p, now down at kind of 36p. So it's kind of halved across sort of a 4-month period, which, as you know, that does reflect what's happening in real life. He hasn't been featuring as much. Sigurdsson's obviously been in the side, largely replacing him as well. So I think
and done a good job as well.
He has, and it's tough to see when you look at Gomez. You think it could go one or two ways. He could come back into the side and have a really good run of things. He got an assist at the weekend, or he could be kind of on the fringes again. But certainly at 36p, he hasn't got much of a downside really.
No, absolutely. Right, there was one Premier League game over the weekend. Aston Villa just strolled to a win against Newcastle, as every team seems to do at the moment. As ever, there's always standout performances from Aston Villa whenever I see them. Whether it's Grealish, whether it's McGinn, whether it's Ollie Watkins. Pete, did you see this game? Because I thought this was just probably the easiest win that I'll see all season.
It was just simple. It was really simple, wasn't it? Newcastle offered almost nothing throughout the entire game. Carroll
so strange to watch.
Carroll looked lost up front, as he tends to do. I've never been a massive fan of Andy Carroll particularly,
wow,
but
Pete.
I don't really see what he offers. But he didn't offer it the other day, that's for sure. I feel to a certain level quite sorry for Steve Bruce. He's doing quite a tough job actually. A club that doesn't know what it wants to do in terms of investment or going forward. It's trying to sell itself. He's been lucky that there's been no fans in the ground, Steve Bruce, but then he also makes strange decisions. You're playing defensively, Steve. Yep. Fine, I'll start 99 attackers against Arsenal. You've been battered by Arsenal, Steve. No worries, I'll go much more solid away at Villa. You've been beaten simply by Villa, Steve. So he just can't seem to get it right now, Steve Bruce. I don't think Steve Bruce is a bad manager, I have to say. There's obviously something going on behind the scenes. I know there's been injuries and a few COVID issues for Newcastle as well, which is never helpful. But Villa have had massive COVID issues, and Dean Smith has handled that so well. And yeah, they come through 2-0. It's one of those games where you go, please describe it to me. And you just say, Villa won. It was never at any point a problem.
It's a really strange one. It didn't feel like a Premier League game in a lot of ways. No intensity at all from Newcastle. But Villa, Rob, Villa, I think they're my favourite team in the league. In Grealish, they've got genuine world-class talent. And in Ollie Watkins, they've signed someone who, all right, he had a little bit of a drought back there, but he looks like the real deal to me.
Yeah, and they've got an incredible front line. You know, they've got obviously Grealish, Watkins, and Barkley is dovetailing really nicely together. They've then got kind of El Ghazi behind that,
Traore.
Yeah. So there's an awful lot of depth there, and I think they're one of those teams that in a sort of fluke season, if you will, could kind of come from nowhere and do it. They're extremely solid at the back as well. And obviously Grealish gets a lot of the headlines, but Watkins is. He's really come of age this season. I think he's got 7 goals in the Premier League so far, so he's kind of on track for about 15, which for someone who's come up from the Championship in their first season would be terrific. And you'd think he'd go on to kind of be a 20-goal-a-season man after that. And trading as he is on Football Index at the moment at kind of 60p, recently kind of ticked up a little bit as well, does just show that some traders might be looking at him and thinking the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's move on to our final player we want to talk about this week. And we're going to go abroad, Pete. We're going to Serie A. We're going to Italy. We mentioned this player earlier on. Zlatan Ibrahimovic. He's 110 this week, and yet he's still banging in goals. Tough game for them this weekend. They lost at home 3-0 to Atalanta AC Milan. But Zlatan stands out for me as being someone, wherever he goes, he seems to be the headline act of whatever league he's in, and he's still doing it.
Yeah, he's our Cantona. He's our generation's Cantona, I suppose, to a certain extent, in that you need a player like that. You need someone with that personality. But then also you need someone with that talent, because he's absolutely outrageous. This season's really helped him because AC Milan have found their feet. They've signed so much better this season than they have done in sort of the last 7 or 8 years combined. Yeah, they've signed great players. They've got a manager who knows what he's doing. And they've got a system. They've got a very clear system, AC Milan. So you've got Zlatan going into that and just being brilliant within it. I mean, this is a guy who's played for every top team across all of the major European leagues. I mean, and I know non-Man United fans in England will go, well, they're not the top team, but okay, a huge name. But he's played for 3 in Italy. He's played for both Milans and Juve. He went off to America. He played for Ajax. He's played for every single massive side, PSG, in Europe. And he starts all the time. He gives results all the time. And even though I would hate to be near him as a personality because I just don't like him, I also love him. And it's it's one of those people where you go, I'd really love to meet that person really, really briefly.
Very briefly. Just quick hello and out. As far as Football Index goes, Rob, Zlatan, he is old. We mentioned him earlier on in respect to Cavani. Is it a similar sort of situation, or does his media sort of presence, does that help with Zlatan?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that when he left United 3 years ago, I think it was, he was kind of considered a dead loss on the platform, and he had his bad knee injury, and he was kind of going off to America, and that's it. That's the end of him. But
I thought that was it.
Yeah, I mean, 3 years later, he's kind of come back and seems even stronger than ever. And he's missed more games this season than he's played, and yet he's, I think, joint second top scorer in Serie A with a ridiculous goal ratio of 1 every 60 minutes. So you just don't really know. I mean, he's priced obviously very low because of his age, but he's still banging in the goals. I think he's got more doubles this season than single goals. So I think he's certainly one player who you may as well hold in your portfolio because of the amount of times he's going to be in the matchday dividend shot.
Get him in. It's Zlatan. Of course you've got to have him. Right, that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Pete. Thank you guys at home for joining us. If you like the show, you can email us. You can, what is that? That's the editor at football365.com. Also, if you like it, don't forget to like it and subscribe and press the notification bell, all that good stuff. This has been 5 to Watch, brought to you by Football Index. We'll be back same time, same place next week. Goodbye.